Hi and welcome to the second webinar focused on carrier Ethernet services. I'm Alex Connors from Vodafone Global Enterprise, and with me again I've got Daniel Barlev from the MEF, and we've got John Hawkins from Ciena. And in this webinar we're going to be focused on the value proposition that a carrier Ethernet services brings to organisations across the world. So let's start with the value that the MEF has brought to Ethernet in the standardisation of services across the market. What value does that bring to our customers and to organisations generally?
Well, there are two main aspects to the value that the MEF has brought to the industry in defining carrier Ethernet services. One is terminology. By having everybody using the same terms, understanding them the same way, everybody using them in the same way, that's good for the enterprise customer when they're buying the products and services. It's good for the service providers and the network operators that are delivering those services. So standardized terminology, very important. The second, of course, is certification. The MEF has a very well-established, well-adopted certification program, both for technology and for the services that run over the technology. And the certification program gives a strong level of assurance to the enterprises that the products that they're specifying, that's what they're actually receiving.
I think that's really important, isn't it? The confidence that it gives our customers that they know exactly what they're getting and they really understand the service that will be delivered at the end of the day. And certainly in other areas I've seen with other technologies where you're talking to the customer about one thing and you're using one term and the customer is thinking about something completely different. With the standardization you deliver with MEF, that's completely disappeared. So John, what about the other areas of the value proposition that Ethernet can bring to the market? What are some of the key points from Ciena's point of view?
Well, we mentioned a couple in the previous session. We mentioned transparency as an example. So independence of the WAN, the wide area network, from the application, for instance. So independent of what application is actually being carried, an end-to-end carrier Ethernet service can accommodate those requirements. As well as independence from the infrastructure itself, which might be a combination or a hybrid type of infrastructure, which may be necessary given the set of circumstances for a given client. The other one we mentioned was just the raw ability to scale. It's easy enough to state that bandwidth is the challenge. That really is the challenge in many scenarios. But it also has the ability to start small and grow over time. So we mentioned granularity as another aspect of scalability. So start where you need it, grow in small increments until you get to where your application is happy, and then you can grow from there as time demands it. So those are a couple of things we've already brought to the.
And I think that granularity is really important. That also goes back to the cost of the wide area network for the customers. So it's always one of the key things for them. If they can scale the network absolutely to meet their needs, that's a real big tick in the box for them. But also, as you get to higher bandwidths, the promise of Ethernet is that the price per megabit goes down, and therefore it becomes a much more cost-effective service. And then I guess the last point about scalability is, as we mentioned previously, customers are now buying 100 gig services. We've never seen that before. And at that speed, Ethernet is the only game in town. So I think that's a
very important aspect to emphasise is that carrier Ethernet services are defined the same way whether you're running at 10 meg or at 1 gig or at 100 gig or in the future perhaps 1 tera.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So it's a very useful concept that works across any type of speed.
Another value I would mention is what we refer to in the lingo as determinism, but it's really predictability of the behavior of the service. So this is important to the end user to know what the service is capable of and how to maximize the value of that service, but also to the operator to be able to show that as a service level agreement to that end user and to back that up with a guaranteed kind of service level. And then the final one I would throw into the mix is the ability to differentiate services over the same kind of infrastructure. So we call that class of service, differentiating between your voice service that may be running over the same infrastructure or a different infrastructure in a hybrid example than your video. So like this webinar might demand certain characteristics from the network that your internet browsing traffic just doesn't require. So you can differentiate between those kinds of behaviors within the context of the carrier Ethernet service, and that's important to end users as well.
Yeah, I think the predictability is really key for lots of our customers. If they're trying to deliver applications that will always perform in a certain way, it's the predictability that is absolutely hugely valuable. So yeah, we've talked about a number of the elements of the value proposition. We've talked about determinism, predictability, we talked about control, we talked about standardization. I think all of those added together, and some of them are more important to some customers than others. It depends what Ethernet is being used for, but all of those give a very compelling proposition for Ethernet services in part of the network. I think one of the things that I would like to draw out is the fact that we're seeing Ethernet, and a lot of our customers are seeing Ethernet as part of a wider network, a hybrid WAN environment that we call it, where different technologies are being used in different parts of the network that require different attributes from that network. So typically we're seeing Ethernet being used in the customer's core network, so that's to connect the large sites together, to connect to the data centers, to connect to the cloud for cloud services. But that will be combined with other technologies, MPLS technologies, and even real low-cost technologies that will be used for small retail outlets particularly, but all need to be delivered as a single wide area network environment with a single set of SLAs and a single management capability across the top. And if we can deliver that as the solution to our customers, which is what Vodafone is doing, that makes a real difference to their environment.
Absolutely. I'd come back to mentioning that all of these are important, but they tend to be swamped by just the desire and demand for bandwidth. And I'll cite a couple of examples in that context. One in a healthcare situation where again, medical scans, as we mentioned in the last webinar, can be gigabytes in size. One image can be a couple of gigabytes, and you may have 30, 40, 50 images in one exam that need to be transferred from a satellite location, perhaps even a truck, back to a central location where they can be examined and viewed. And we have demonstrations where we've showed that sort of transition, or that sort of transfer, taking hours on end, versus with a fat Ethernet pipe, as we call it, a few seconds. So it can be almost real time in terms of having feedback to that patient who is mightily curious as to the results of that.
And it changes the whole dynamic of the health industry as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
you can move those clinics out in a way that you couldn't before.
Changes the business model altogether. The other example I would cite are sporting events where video, often raw, uncompressed video, needs to be transferred from a stadium site somewhere back to a studio where it can be appropriately mixed and distributed throughout a network. Typically that happens on a truck somewhere outside the stadium. And again, these are gigabytes worth of data that need to be there for the extent of the event, and then not needed anymore. So the flexibility of Ethernet, but it's time and again the examples we run into are just the need for speed, the need for raw bandwidth, and I think that's where Ethernet is really capitalizing on in terms of its value proposition.
And yeah, and you're right. And that for the first example you gave, you're talking about potentially life and death scenarios as well. So the implications can be pretty major in some cases. So thank you both. I think we've drawn out some of the key messages of the value proposition and where Ethernet can fit within customers' networks. The next webinar will be looking at the future of Ethernet and where we think it will be going in the next 2 to 3 years. So look out for that. And thanks for watching.